Eastern Syria today as the U.S. scrambled fighter jets to protect special operations personnel from a Syrian government bombing on Friday. There was no direct contact between U.S. and Syrian forces, but it's thought to be the first time that U.S. soldiers there felt threatened enough to call in some help. Let's bring in Kim Gaddis, BBC journalist and author of The Secretary, a journey with Hillary Clinton from Beirut to the...
Wait a minute. They said U.S. soldiers felt threatened in Syria. Well, if they weren't there, they wouldn't feel threatened.
To the heart of American power. Kim, them asking for assistance, is that concerning?
That is concerning. Whenever the battle lines move in Syria, whether it's the possibility of Aleppo falling to Syrian government forces, whether it's potentially ISIS going on the move again, or as in this case, when you have a close call between U.S. forces and Syrian forces, the first time that we see this really, that is concerning. Not just for the president himself, who would probably prefer not to see the U.S. dragged further into this conflict until he leaves office, but also concerning, of course, for the two candidates, whoever wins the White House, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's Hillary Clinton. Syria will be the thorniest, most urgent and most complicated foreign policy file that they will inherit and they will have to deal with quite soon after they get to the White House.
Yeah, Kim, with limited involvement at the moment from the United States, at least from what we know, should the United States then, should President Obama be planning a phase 2, phase 3 here where more boots will be on the ground? A question that's been often asked over the months.
Well, I assume that as a president, he's always planning for plan A, plan B, plan C. As we've seen, the situation is very fluid in Syria right now because of the increased involvement of Russia, because of this close encounter we saw in Al-Hasaka in this area of northeast Syria. But the president's been very resistant to further American involvement on the ground. What we've heard from a candidate like Hillary Clinton, for example, and her vice president Tim Kaine in the past, as when he was before he became a vice presidential nominee, is that the U.S. should be more involved, should implement a no-fly zone and a safe zone, should help with the refugee crisis. All of these things are steps in this conflict that President Obama has so far resisted.
And part of this calculus here, Kim, is Russia. And as you know, just today, getting the news that 3 cruise missiles fired by Russia into areas near that critical area you're mentioning, Aleppo. That balance is difficult. Their first use of cruise missiles, how is that coordination happening on the ground? And for the United States, that balance between Russia and the United States as they try to leave their footprints there in Syria?
Well, when you speak to Western officials and American diplomats, the sense you get is of frustration that some of Russia's actions, whether it was their initial large-scale involvement over a year ago, came as a surprise. Their strikes this time came as a bit of a surprise. But most concerning is their use of an Iran airbase to launch some of those strikes earlier this week. I just came back from a visit home to Lebanon, and I can tell you that even though people in the region are not necessarily fans of America the superpower, America the hegemon, there's a lot of queasiness about the idea that Russia is increasing its military footprint in the region in coordination with Iran. All of these are things that this president and the next president will have to take into account. And I know from my many conversations and interviews with Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, that this is one of her primary concerns, to draw a line in the sand when it comes to Russian involvement in the region. I remember one conversation with her particularly about that very early on in the conflict, where she expressed concern about a vacuum unfolding in the region that could be filled by countries like Russia, Iran, and of course players like Hezbollah and Hamas.
But Kim, part of that they'd have to consider in the support and the discussion of that power vacuum that you're alluding to are these complexities of Russia being involved. And the picture that came out this last week that got so much discussion, it was that Syrian boy, Omran Daknish. Just a worldwide reaction to this photo right here. And it's been reported, as you know, that the airstrike that hurt him was led by the Russians. So as this discussion of supporting or not supporting the U.S.-Russian coordination in that area, pictures like this don't make it simple.
Pictures like that help Hillary Clinton become president. Pictures like that justify U.S. involvement in Syria. Pictures like that justify the U.S.-Israeli takeover of the Middle East. Pictures like that don't include pictures of Palestinian children, where they celebrate the fullness of Palestinian children who are bloodied, cut in half, disfigured so bad they won't even show it on television. This is eye candy for the Hillary Clinton campaign.
No, they certainly don't make it simple. It is one of the biggest tragedies that we've seen in recent year. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of children just like Omran Daknish every day in Aleppo. There are thousands of children who have died in this 5-year-long conflict, and it has...
What about the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that died at the hands of the United States government since Bush invaded Iraq? We don't hear the media celebrating the fullness of those children. No, it's just for Hillary and U.S. Israeli Middle East takeover. That's what this is all about. It's not about helping folks. The U.S. will kill as many as people as they need to accomplish their goal for Israel to take over the Middle East.
Has been very dispiriting for people who cover this conflict. I have many colleagues who are on the ground to see that very little gets the world's attention. This picture, this child did get a lot of attention. But remember, like I said, every day there are children like that who are bloodied, who are killed in this conflict. Last year, there was an outcry after we saw the washed up dead body of a young child on the shores of a beach, Alan Kurdi. That provoked an outcry. The problem is that none of the options are easy when it comes to Syria, and they can be summed up to 3, I would say. A, the U.S. gets more involved militarily to tip the balance in favor of the rebels and build leverage in a political settlement with President Assad. Or
the rebels, ISIS.
Or the U.S. decides to take a step back, let the Russians handle all of it, and tip the balance in favor of President Assad. Third is what we're seeing right now is this sort of muddle where no one is able to tip the balance in either direction. All of these options are complicated and they come at a huge cost, especially for Syrian civilians, but also on a geopolitical level, they have implications for American power, for Russian involvement in the Middle East.
Kim Gaddis, thank you so much for the BBC. Appreciate your time today.